You know, the thing about happiness is that it makes you stupid. It makes you blind. When you're standing in the middle of your own perfect little dream, you don't look for the cracks in the walls. You don't listen for the noises in the attic. You just smile, breathe it all in, and believe it's going to last forever. That was us. That was me and Chloe, standing on the freshly cut lawn of our first home. It was a single-story ranch house on a sleepy suburban street called Maple Drive. The kind of place you see in old TV shows. Built in the late 70s, it had what the real estate agent called vintage charm, which was a nice way of saying it hadn't been updated in 40 years. But we loved it. We loved the burnt orange shag carpet in the living room that felt like walking on a friendly monster. We even loved the loud, floral wallpaper in the kitchen, a chaotic explosion of yellow and brown daisies. To us, it wasn't tacky, it was a time capsule. It was a home that had seen life, a place where a family had grown. It felt safe, solid. The whole neighborhood felt that way. The quiet was the first thing I noticed. It wasn't an empty quiet, but a settled quiet. The hum of a distant lawnmower, the chime of an ice cream truck 3 streets over, the happy shrieks of kids on bikes. Every lawn was a perfect green square. Every mailbox stood at attention. We'd moved from a cramped city apartment where the sirens were our lullaby, so this was paradise. It was so perfect it almost felt like a movie set. Looking back, I think maybe it was. Only we didn't know we were the stars of the show. The first couple of days were a blur of cardboard boxes, the scent of fresh paint, and takeout pizza eaten on the floor. We were exhausted but buzzing. Every little thing was an adventure. Figuring out which light switch controlled what. Discovering a lazy Susan in a corner cabinet. Arguing playfully over where the sofa should go. "This is it, Liam," Chloe said one afternoon, her voice soft. She was standing in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room, just watching me wrestle a bookshelf into place. "This is our forever place." I stopped what I was doing, covered in dust and sweat, and just looked at her. Her smile was the brightest thing in the whole house. God, we were so naive. It was on the 3rd day that we saw him. Our neighbor. We were bringing in a box of plants from the car, and I glanced across the street. There was an old man, tall and thin, standing in his yard. His house was a mirror image of ours, just with different colored trim. He was holding a gardening trowel, but he wasn't gardening. He was just standing there, motionless, staring at his prize-winning azaleas or something. Then his head turned, very slowly, and he looked right at us. He raised a hand in a slow, deliberate wave. "Oh, look, a neighbor," Chloe whispered, waving back with a big, friendly smile. I gave a nod and a small wave of my own. He didn't smile. His face was just a blank mask, hard to read from that distance. He held the wave for a second too long, then just as slowly lowered his hand and turned back to his yard. "A little quiet, maybe," I said, picking up the box. "He's probably just a sweet old man," Chloe said, ever the optimist. "We should bake him some cookies once we're settled." I agreed, and we didn't think anything more of it. He was just Arthur. That's what the name on his mailbox said. Arthur Maxwell, just a quiet old man in a quiet old neighborhood. The source of all our problems came from the attic. Of course it did. It's always the attic or the basement, isn't it? On Saturday, while Chloe was meticulously organizing the kitchen, I decided to tackle the attic. It was my job to check for leaks, assess the storage space, and generally get a feel for the bones of the house. Pulling down the folding ladder from the hallway ceiling felt like opening a crypt. A wave of hot, stale air washed over me, thick with the smell of ancient dust and sun-baked wood. I climbed up, my footsteps creaking loudly on the plywood floor. It was exactly what you'd expect. Murky, cluttered with forgotten junk left by a generation of previous owners, and spiderwebs that were probably older than I was. A single, bare bulb cast long, distorted shadows, making ordinary shapes look menacing. I was in the far corner, behind a stack of old newspapers yellowed with age, when I saw it. It was a metal box, like an old-fashioned tackle box or a small footlocker. It was gray, with rust speckling the corners and the latch. It wasn't hidden, exactly, but it was definitely tucked away, as if someone had put it there and just forgotten about it. My curiosity got the better of me. I dragged it out into the weak light of the single bulb. It was surprisingly heavy, the latches were stiff, and I had to pry them open with the edge of my pocketknife. They sprang open with a loud, metallic clack that echoed in the silence of the attic. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in yellowed, brittle foam padding, was a piece of history. A Super -8 film projector. It was beautiful in a clunky, mechanical way. Beside it, stacked neatly in 2 rows, were about a dozen small, plastic reels of film. Each one had a crisp, white label stuck to its center, the kind you make with an old-school label maker where the letters are punched into the plastic. The text was neat, precise. Timmy's 7th birthday, summer vacation, 78. Lake trip, first snow, I picked one up, Christmas, 80. The plastic felt cool in my hand. It was like I was holding someone's memories. The family that lived here before us. The ones who picked out that crazy floral wallpaper. The ones who planted the big oak tree in the backyard. Chloe, I yelled down the attic stairs. You gotta see this. She came to the bottom of the ladder, wiping her hands on her jeans. What is it? Did you find a dead raccoon? Better, I said, grinning. I found ghosts. I brought the box down into the bright, cheerful light of the hallway, and the whole thing felt less like a relic from a tomb and more like a treasure. We spread the reels out on the shag carpet. Chloe picked them up one by one, reading the labels aloud, her voice filled with a kind of gentle wonder. Oh, Liam, look at this, she said. Timmy's first steps. This is incredible. It's like a complete history of a family. I know, right? I felt a weird sense of connection to these faceless people. It feels wrong that they just left it here. Maybe they forgot, she mused, tracing the embossed letters on one of the labels. Or maybe they wanted it to stay with the house. A part of its story. We spent the rest of the afternoon imagining who they were. The dad, probably a guy with a mustache and sideburns. The mom, with big feathered hair. Timmy, the kid who starred in most of the titles. We felt like archaeologists who had just unearthed a lost civilization. There was no sense of dread, no feeling of unease. The discovery only made us love the house more. It had secrets, but they felt like happy ones. It had a soul. That night, after a dinner of leftover pizza and cheap wine to celebrate our first weekend in the house, Chloe looked over at the metal box sitting by the TV stand. A glint of mischief was in her eyes. So, she said, nodding towards it, are we going to meet the family? My heart did a little jump of excitement. It felt slightly taboo, like we were spying, but the curiosity was overwhelming. I don't see why not. The projector seems to be in good shape. I pulled it out and set it up on the coffee table. It hummed to life with a surprisingly loud whir, the fan kicking on, the bulb glowing warmly. We turned off the lamps, plunging the living room into darkness, save for the bright, empty rectangle the projector cast on the plain white wall opposite the sofa. The air filled with the clicking of the sprockets and the scent of warm plastic and old film. We curled up together on the sofa, a bowl of popcorn between us. It felt right, cozy, a perfect end to a perfect day in our perfect new home. Which one first? I asked, my voice a whisper in the dark room. Chloe reached into the box and pulled one out at random. She held it up to the light of the projector beam. Christmas, 80, she read. Let's start with a happy one. I took the reel from her. My fingers felt clumsy as I threaded the strip of celluloid film through the projector's complex path, just like I'd seen my own dad do a lifetime ago. The leader clicked and rattled as it fed through the mechanism. I took a deep breath, my hand hovering over the switch. We were about to look through a window, 40 years into the past, into the lives of the people who had made this house our home. I felt Chloe squeeze my arm in anticipation. I flipped the switch, and just like that, the blank white rectangle on our wall came to life. The first few feet of film were a jittery mess of light flares and overexposed white, the projector chattering away on the coffee table like a mechanical cricket. The sound was the first thing that really took me back. It wasn't just the whirring of the motor, but that specific, gentle click-clack of the sprockets pulling the celluloid through the gate. It was the sound of my own childhood, of my dad digging out our old home movies. The room filled with the scent of hot dust and melting plastic. It felt authentic. Then, an image resolved itself. The color was that specific, warm, slightly faded shade of old film, you know? Like the whole world had been dipped in weak tea. The words, Merry Xmas 1980 feet appeared on screen, written in shaky, childlike letters on a piece of red construction paper. Oh my God, look, Chloe whispered, her voice full of delight. She scooted closer, grabbing a handful of popcorn. The camera, clearly handheld, panned shakily across a living room. And it was our living room. It was bizarre. The layout was the same, the fireplace was in the same spot, but it was dressed in another family's life. A huge, tinsel-laden Christmas tree stood in the corner where our sad-looking fiddle-leaf fig now resided. The walls were covered in a different, equally loud wallpaper. The burnt orange shag carpet, our carpet, looked brand new. Then the family came into view. There was the dad, a thin man with a thick mustache and large, aviator-style glasses, beaming as he carved a turkey on a dining table placed exactly where we'd eaten pizza on the floor a few hours earlier. The mom, her blonde hair feathered back in that classic 70s style, was laughing, holding up a new sweater. And a little boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, who had to be Timmy. He was tearing open a gift, his face a perfect picture of pure, unadulterated joy. "This is so sweet," Chloe said, her chin resting on her knees. "It feels happy. This house has happy memories, Liam." I nodded, my mouth full. "Told you I found ghosts. Happy ones." We watched for another 5 minutes, completely captivated. Timmy got a shiny red bicycle. The dad got a tie. The mom got a new pot for the kitchen. It was mundane. It was perfect. We were smiling, watching these strangers live out a moment of happiness in our new home, 40 years in the past. It deepened our connection to the place, made it feel like we were just the next chapter in a long, happy story. The cameraman, who I figured was probably an uncle or a grandfather, wasn't a professional. The camera shook, it zoomed in and out at awkward times, and at one point, it panned away from the family, sweeping across the room. It moved past the fireplace, past a gaudy-looking lamp on the side table, and then, it lingered on the main living room window. The one that looked out onto the front lawn and the street beyond. It was just for a second, an unsteady, passing glance at the world outside before swinging back to Timmy trying on a new baseball glove. But in that second, Chloe grabbed my arm. Not hard, but enough for me to notice. "Wait," she said, her voice suddenly low. "Go back." "What?" I looked at her. Her easy smile was gone. Her eyes were fixed on the wall, even though the scene had already moved on. "Go back to what?" "The window," she said, more insistent now. "Rewind it." I saw something. I sighed. "It breaks the magic, you know?" Stopping and starting, but she looked serious. I stopped the projector and, with a loud grinding noise, spooled the film back a few feet. I fumbled a bit, the image jumping and blurring. "There. Stop," she ordered. I stopped it. The projector's fan hummed loudly in the now silent room. The image on the wall was a still frame of the window. Because of the bright lights inside the house, the world outside was dark and hard to see, mostly just reflections on the glass. The camera's unsteadiness made the image slightly blurry. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "Look," she said, and she got up, walking to the wall and pointing. Her finger traced a spot on the projected image. "Right there, by the streetlight." I squinted. Our house was on a slight curve, so the streetlight across the road was perfectly visible from that window. And as my eyes adjusted, I saw it. It wasn't a reflection. Standing just at the edge of the cone of light cast by the street lamp was a figure. A person. It was impossible to make out any details. It was just a silhouette. Tall, thin, and perfectly still. They weren't walking by, or getting into a car, or walking a dog. They were just standing there, facing our house, watching. A little knot of unease tightened in my gut. I told myself it was just the context. Seeing it in this grainy, old film made it feel sinister. "Huh," I said, trying to sound casual. "Weird." "Weird?" Chloe turned to face me, her arms crossed. "Liam, that's creepy as hell. They're just standing there, in the dark, staring at the house while this family is inside opening Christmas presents." "It's probably just a neighbor going for a walk," I said, hitting the play button. The clicking started again, and Timmy was back on the screen, laughing. I was trying to force the mood back to what it was, to smooth over the crack that had just appeared. Or maybe it's a glitch in the film. You know, like an imprint from another frame. Old film does weird stuff. I was talking out of my ass. I didn't know if old film did that. But it sounded plausible. It sounded better than the alternative. Chloe didn't move. She just stood there, watching the wall. "It didn't look like a glitch," she said quietly. "It looked like a person. Why would someone do that? Just stand there and watch?" The fun just evaporated. The happy little ghosts on the wall didn't feel so happy anymore. The whole thing suddenly felt tainted, like we were watching evidence, not a memory. The cheerful clicking of the projector now sounded nervous and brittle. I turned the machine off. The image vanished, plunging the room into darkness, and the silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. I flicked on a lamp. Chloe, come on, I said, trying for a reassuring smile. It was 40 years ago. It was probably nothing. You can't let a 2-second shadow in a home movie freak you out. We live in the safest, most boring neighborhood in America. She came back to the sofa but didn't sit close to me. She just sat on the edge, hugging her knees to her chest. I know, it's just the feeling. It's an invasion of privacy. That family thought they were safe in their home, having a private moment, and some creep was out there in the dark, just watching them. She shuddered. It ruins the whole thing for me. And just like that, the treasure from the attic was no longer a treasure. It was a source of anxiety. The box on the floor seemed less like a time capsule and more like Pandora's box. We didn't watch any more films that night. The cozy, adventurous mood was gone, replaced by a quiet tension. I tried to make a joke about it, something about Neighborhood Watch being more intense back in the day, but it felt completely flat. We went to bed not long after that. I tried to tell myself I was just tired, that the strangeness of it all was getting to me. I thought I'd fall right asleep. But I couldn't. I lay there, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the new house. The hum of the refrigerator, the groan of a floorboard settling somewhere, the wind whistling faintly around the edge of the window frame. Every little sound felt amplified. Before, they were charmingly domestic. Now, they felt like precursors. Like the house was trying to warn us about something. I was facing the wall, but I could feel Chloe wasn't sleeping either. The mattress was still. Her breathing was too controlled, too quiet. She was awake, and she was listening, just like me. After what felt like an hour of us both pretending to be asleep, I heard her move. It was slow, careful. The whisper of the sheets as she sat up. The soft patting of her bare feet on the hardwood floor of the bedroom. I didn't move. I kept my eyes closed, breathing evenly. I don't know why. I guess I didn't want to start the argument over again. Didn't want to have to rationalize and explain away her fear when a part of me was starting to feel it too. I heard her walk out of the bedroom and into the hall. A thin sliver of light from the living room cut under our door, meaning she'd turned on that same lamp. I waited. A minute passed, then another. Finally, I rolled over. The bed felt cold and empty without her. I got up, my own feet silent on the floor, and padded to the doorway. I peeked around the frame, and my heart did a slow, painful lurch. Chloe was standing in the middle of the living room. She was just a silhouette against the large front window, the one from the film. The moonlight outside was bright enough to cast everything in a pale, silvery glow. She was perfectly still, arms wrapped around herself, staring out into the night. I followed her gaze, out the window, across our perfectly manicured lawn, to the street. To the exact spot where the streetlight cast its lonely, orange cone of light onto the pavement. The street was empty. Of course it was empty. There were no cars, no late-night dog walkers, nothing, just the quiet, sleeping suburban street we'd fallen in love with. But it didn't bring me any relief. Watching her stand there, a sentinel in her own home, staring at an empty spot on the pavement, was somehow more terrifying than if there had been someone there. The threat wasn't the man in the film anymore. The threat was the idea of him, the feeling he'd left behind, a seed of fear planted 40 years ago that had finally taken root in our living room. She stood there for a long time, not moving, just watching the empty space. And I couldn't shake the feeling, a cold certainty that settled deep in my bones, that even though we couldn't see anyone, she was right. Someone was watching us. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. You know that feeling when you have a huge fight with someone you love, and then for days afterwards the air in the house gets thick and heavy? It was like that, except we hadn't fought with each other. We'd had a fight with a ghost on a 40-year-old piece of plastic film, and the ghost had won. We didn't talk about it. We just existed around the subject. Chloe would jump at the slightest sound. I found myself checking the locks 2-3 times before bed. The box of films sat on the floor by the TV, a silent, accusatory presence. Neither of us wanted to touch it, but neither of us wanted to be the one to suggest throwing it out. It felt like admitting defeat. So we tried to force normalcy. We bought a new rug for the bedroom. We spent an entire Saturday assembling a flat-pack bookcase that nearly ended in divorce, which, ironically, felt like a relief. It was a normal problem. A real problem, not like this creeping, undefined dread that had seeped into the new paint smell of our home. It was on a Wednesday night, about a week after the Christmas movie incident, that I finally cracked. We were eating dinner in silence, the only sound the scraping of forks on plates. I couldn't take it anymore. We should watch another one, I said. Chloe didn't even look up from her pasta. No, come on, I pushed, trying to sound reasonable, upbeat. It'll prove it was a fluke. A one-off. A weirdo walking home in 1980. We'll put on Timmy's 7th birthday. What could be more harmless than that? It'll be all sunshine and cake. It'll erase the bad taste from the other one. I don't want to, Liam. Her voice was flat. It won't be harmless. I don't want to see him again. You won't see him again, I insisted, a little too loudly. Because he's not going to be there. It was a coincidence. We're letting it get into our heads. We can't let some shadow in an old movie make us scared of our own house. We have to take back the control here. I was saying it for her, but I was really saying it for me. I needed to believe it. I needed to see a film of this happy family that wasn't tainted. I needed to prove my own rationalizations right. She stared at me for a long time, her fork hovering over her plate. I could see the battle in her eyes. The fear versus the desire to believe me. Finally, she let out a long, slow breath and gave a tiny, defeated nod. Fine, she whispered. One more. But if I see anything at all, we're stopping. And we're throwing that whole box in the goddamn trash. Deal, I said, maybe a little too quickly. An hour later, the projector was whirring again. The sound didn't feel cozy this time. It felt like an engine turning over in a horror movie, the one that fails right when you need it most. The coffee table felt less like a piece of furniture and more like an altar for some strange ritual. The title card flashed up, Timmy's B-Day. Number 7. The film stock was even warmer, more golden, than the Christmas one. It was all sunshine. The scene opened in our backyard. But it was filled with striped folding lawn chairs, a long table covered in a red and white checkered cloth, and a bunch of kids in shorts and t-shirts running wild through a sprinkler. It was the picture of suburban paradise. There was Timmy, a little younger now, his hair shaggier. He was blowing out the candles on a cake shaped like a baseball mitt. His dad, the same guy with the mustache, was standing behind a big, smoking barbecue grill, wearing a chef's hat that said, "Kiss the cook." His mom was handing out paper plates of hot dogs. It was perfect. It was exactly what I promised Chloe it would be. I risked a glance at her. Some of the tension had left her shoulders. A small smile was playing on her lips. She was watching Timmy chase another kid with a water pistol. See? I whispered, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. Happy ghosts. She nodded, not taking her eyes off the screen. Okay, you were right. We watched, mesmerized, for another 10 minutes. The camera was just as shaky as before, clearly held by someone participating in the party. It would follow a kid running, then pan over to the adults laughing and drinking beers. It captured candid moments of pure, unself-conscious happiness. The bad feelings started to recede. It really was just a fluke. We were being paranoid. I started to relax, sinking back into the couch. The house was safe. The memories were good. The cameraman zoomed in on Timmy hitting a piñata with a wiffle ball bat. Candy exploded everywhere and all the kids shrieked with joy, scrambling on the lawn to grab it. The camera stayed on the chaotic, happy scene for a moment, then, for some reason, it pulled back. It panned away from the kids, past the smiling parents, past the smoking grill. It kept going, panning across the green expanse of the lawn. Towards the back of the property. Towards the line of thick, dark woods that separated our yard from the undeveloped land behind it. My body went rigid before my brain even processed why. It was just a feeling. A cold, sudden certainty. Don't look over there, instinct. Chloe saw it at the same instant I did. I didn't need to look at her. I heard her make a sound, a tiny, strangled gasp, like a hiccup of pure fear. The camera stopped. It held the shot. And there he was. It wasn't a murky silhouette this time. The bright afternoon sun made him clearer. He was standing just inside the tree line, where the deep shadows of the forest began. Partially obscured by the trunk of a large oak tree, but unmistakably there. A man, tall, impossibly thin, like a figure drawn with too few lines. He was wearing dark pants and a plain, light-colored shirt. He wasn't holding anything, his hands were just at his sides. And he was perfectly, unnaturally still. He wasn't a guest who had wandered off. He wasn't a neighbor out for a walk in the woods. He was watching. The kids were maybe 50 feet away from him, laughing and stuffing their faces with candy, completely oblivious. The parents had their backs to the woods, focused on the party. But the cameraman saw him. The camera was pointed right at him. Just for a few seconds. An eternity. It felt like the person holding the camera was trying to silently signal something. Look what I see. Then, as if caught doing something wrong, the camera operator jerked the lens away, swinging it back to the party, focusing shakily on a close-up of a half-eaten hot dog on a paper plate. But it was too late. We'd seen him. I slammed my hand down on the projector's off switch. The whirring died. The image vanished. The silence that crashed down on us was absolute and terrifying. It was broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. No, Chloe whispered into the darkness. It wasn't a denial. It was a plea. No, no, no. I fumbled for the lamp switch and flooded the room with light. She was curled into a tight ball on the far end of the couch, her face pale, her eyes wide and staring at the blank wall where the image had been. "That's it," she said, her voice shaking but full of a terrible certainty. "That's him. That's the same person." "I know," I managed to say. My throat was dry. All my smug reassurances, all my logical explanations, had turned to ash in my mouth. There was no denying it now. No coincidence could explain this. This wasn't a random event. It was a pattern, a history. "What do we do, Liam?" she asked, her voice cracking. "What the hell do we do? He was in our backyard." "He was in their backyard," I corrected, my words feeling hollow and useless. 40 years ago. It doesn't matter. He was here. She stood up, pacing back and forth in the small space between the couch and the TV. "This isn't sweet. This isn't happy memories. This is evidence. This is some sicko's stalking journal. Why would the family keep these? Why would you keep films of the man who was terrorizing you?" And that question hung in the air, a chilling, impossible problem. Why would they? Unless, maybe they didn't know, I said, thinking out loud. Maybe only the person filming saw him. Maybe they never even told the others. "So we call the police," she declared, stopping her pacing. "We take them the films. We tell them some peeping Tom was stalking the previous owners of our house." I ran a hand through my hair, the futility of it all crashing down on me. "And say what, Chloe?" "Hello, officer? We have some grainy footage from 1978 of a guy standing near our house. Can you run a background check on a blurry shape? They'll think we're insane. They'll laugh us out of the station. There's no crime here, not anymore. It was 40 years ago. So we do nothing?" she yelled, her voice raw with fear and frustration. "We just sit here in his house, knowing that he stood right out there," she pointed a trembling finger at the back window, "and watched children? We just pretend it's fine?" "I don't know," I shouted back, standing up to face her. "I don't know what to do. Burn them? Pretend we never found them? Move? What is the answer here? We were just standing there, yelling in our living room, two terrified people with an impossible problem, trapped by a fear that had no name and no face. A fear that was simultaneously 40 years old and brand new. The house, our perfect, safe, quiet little house, suddenly felt like a cage. Every shadow seemed deeper, every corner seemed to hold a secret. And then, the doorbell rang. The sound, a cheerful, two-tone ding-dong, cut through our argument like a gunshot. We both froze, staring at each other wide-eyed. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was almost 10 o'clock at night. Nobody rings a doorbell at 10 o'clock in our quiet, sleepy neighborhood. Not unless it's an emergency. Or something else. The sound echoed the silence that followed. "Who? Don't answer it," Chloe mouthed, her face a mask of primal fear. I held up a hand for her to be quiet, my own mind racing. It could be anything. A kid selling cookies late. A neighbor needing help. It was probably nothing, but probably didn't feel very reassuring anymore. I crept to the front door, my footsteps silent on the rug. My whole body was coiled like a spring. Chloe stayed frozen by the couch, watching me. I leaned forward, pressing my eye against the cold metal of the peephole. The fisheye lens warped the world outside into a strange, distorted bubble. On our porch, bathed in the yellow glow of the single bulb, stood a man. An old man. He was holding a ceramic plate covered in what looked like foil. It was our neighbor, the one who lived in the house directly across the street, the one we'd only ever waved to. He was smiling, a wide, placid, crinkle-eyed smile. He adjusted his glasses and raised the plate a little, as if presenting it to the door. And as my eye took in the details, the thin frame of his glasses, the loose-fitting cardigan, the kind smile, my blood ran cold. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't the smile that scared me. It was the frame it was on. He was tall, and even under the bulky cardigan, it was obvious. He was very, very thin. My heart was a drum solo against my ribs. Chloe stood behind me, a statue carved from fear. The ding-dong of the doorbell still hung in the thick, silent air of our living room. It was an alien sound in a house that had suddenly become hostile territory. I took a shaky breath. I had to be the rational one. It was my job. It's probably nothing, I whispered, the words sounding flimsy even to my own ears. Don't, Chloe mouthed back, her eyes huge. Liam, please don't. But I was already moving. I had to know. The not knowing was worse, wasn't it? It let your imagination run wild, and my imagination was currently painting some very ugly pictures. I tiptoed to the door, my socked feet making no sound on the old hardwood. I leaned forward, putting my eye to the peephole. The world outside was a warped, yellow bubble, and in the center of that bubble stood the man from across the street. He was holding a dinner plate covered in aluminum foil, and he was smiling. I mean, just a normal, neighborly smile. It's funny, the things your brain latches onto in moments like this. I noticed his cardigan was the color of oatmeal and he had a small stain on the pocket. Normal things. He shifted his weight, and for a second, his smile faltered. He was just looking at the door, waiting. And then I saw it. The thing that made the normal scene turn horribly, grotesquely wrong. Under the porch light, underneath the baggy cardigan, I could see his outline. He was tall, and he was thin, unnaturally thin, like the man in the woods. My blood ran cold. I felt a bolt of ice shoot down my spine, and my hand, resting on the doorknob, started to tremble. It couldn't be. No, this was an old man. A nice old man with a plate of what was probably brownies. My brain was just short-circuiting, connecting dots that weren't there because we'd just watched that goddamn film. Who is it? Chloe hissed from the living room. It's the neighbor, I breathed back, not taking my eye from the peephole. From across the street. He has a plate. The old man must have heard my voice, because he smiled again, wider this time, and held the plate up a little higher, like a peace offering. I had to open the door. Not opening it would be an admission of fear. It would be insane. It would make us the weird new neighbors who hide from people offering them baked goods. I took a deep breath, plastered a fake smile on my face that felt like a Halloween mask, and turned the lock. The door creaked open. The night air was cool. Evening, the man said, his voice a little reedy, but friendly. Sorry to bother you so late. The wife, she went a little overboard with the brownies. Figured you two might like some. A welcome to the neighborhood kind of thing. Oh, I said. My voice sounded a full octave higher than usual. Wow, that's so nice of you. You really didn't have to. Nonsense. I'm Arthur, by the way. He extended a hand that wasn't holding the plate. His fingers were long and bony, the knuckles like little knots of wood. I shook it. His hand was surprisingly cold and dry, like old paper. Liam, and this is my wife, Chloe. I glanced back. Chloe had crept forward, but she was still half hidden by the doorway to the living room, her arms wrapped tight around herself. She gave a little wave that was more of a twitch. Arthur's eyes, magnified by his thick glasses, shifted from me to her. And they stayed there. His smile never left his face, but his eyes, they were just looking. Taking her in. It was only for a second or two, but it felt like an eternity. He wasn't just glancing at her. He was observing her. Pleasure, he said, finally turning back to me. Well, hope you're settling in all right. It's a good house. Lots of history. Yeah, it's great, I said, trying to end the conversation, trying to take the plate and shut the door and lock it. We love it. Good, good, he nodded, his gaze sweeping past me, into our house, at the projector still sitting on the coffee table. His smile tightened almost imperceptibly at the corners. Just wanted to make sure you felt welcome. It's a very quiet street. We all look out for each other here. The way he said it, look out for each other, sent a fresh chill down my back. It didn't sound like a comfort. It sounded like a warning. Well, thank you, Arthur. Really, I said, finally taking the plate from him. It was still warm. We appreciate it. Not a problem, he said. He gave one last, long look at Chloe, then a thin-lipped smile to me, and turned. Have a good night. He ambled back down our porch steps and across the empty street, his tall, thin silhouette moving with a slow, deliberate pace under the orange glow of the streetlights. I watched until his front door clicked shut. Then I closed our door, turned the deadbolt, and leaned my forehead against the cool wood, my eyes squeezed shut. Liam, Chloe whispered. Her voice was trembling. His shape, the way he stands. I know, I said, turning around. I know, but Chloe, he's an old man. He brought us brownies. I held out the plate. She looked at it like it was a live snake. I'm not eating those, she said flatly. I don't want that in our house. We didn't argue. I put the plate on the kitchen counter, a warm, foil-covered balm in the center of our new home. We didn't talk. We cleaned up the living room, putting the projector away, coiling its cord. We put the film reel back in the box with the others. We moved around each other like two strangers, the silence thick with everything we weren't saying. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the old house settling was a footstep. Every rush of wind outside was a whisper. Around 2 in the morning, I heard Chloe get out of bed. I lay there, listening to her soft footsteps go into the living room. I waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then I heard choked sob. A small, horrified sound. I was out of bed in a second, my heart hammering. I found her standing by the living room window, one that looked out onto the front lawn and the street. She was holding the curtain back with a trembling hand, her other hand clamped over her mouth. Her shoulders were shaking. What is it? I whispered, rushing to her side. Chloe, what's wrong? She didn't answer. She just pointed a shaky finger out the window. I looked, and my stomach dropped into my shoes. The street was dark and empty, lit only by the lonely cone of light from the lamp post. And standing on the edge of his own lawn, directly across from our house, was Arthur. He wasn't doing anything. He wasn't getting the mail or looking for a lost cat. He was just standing there, perfectly still, a statue in an oatmeal-colored cardigan. He was facing our house. Just watching. The friendly old neighbor persona was gone, stripped away by the darkness and the silence. All that was left was the shape. The tall, thin, motionless shape from the woods. The silhouette a family had been seeing 40 years ago. He was real, and he lived 30 yards away. Oh my God, I breathed. All the rationalizations, all the attempts to explain it away, they just evaporated. The fear was no longer a ghost from the past. It was here, it was now, and it had brought us brownies. We stood there for I don't know how long, watching him watch us, two prisoners in our own home. Finally, as if he knew he'd been seen, he turned with that same slow, deliberate pace and walked back into his house. The light in his front window, which had been off, flicked on, then off again. Chloe finally let out the breath she'd been holding and collapsed against me, sobbing. What do we do? Liam, what the hell do we do? We have to call the police. And tell them what? I said, my own voice hollow with despair. I was holding her, but I felt just as helpless. Tell them our elderly neighbor stood on his own lawn? They'll think we're crazy. It's his property. There's no crime. This isn't right, she cried into my chest. This isn't normal. He's the man from the films. He has to be. I know, I said, my mind racing, desperately trying to find a foothold, a logical next step. I know, an awful, desperate idea began to form in my head. A terrible idea, but the only one I had. There was one piece of the puzzle left. One last reel in that cursed box. There's one more, I said, pulling away from her to look her in the eyes. One more film. She stared at me in disbelief. Are you insane? No, absolutely not. We're done with those. Chloe, listen to me, I pleaded, my voice low and urgent. Why did that family leave? They left in a hurry, right? Something must have happened. Something that made them finally pack up and run. The last film, it's labeled, Goodbye. Maybe it shows us why. Maybe it shows us what he did. Maybe it will give us something real, something we can actually do. I was desperate. I was grasping at straws, but it was the only thing I could think of. We couldn't live like this, jumping at shadows, terrified of our own neighbor. We needed an answer. We had to see the end of their story to figure out how to start ours. She looked from my face to the window, then back again. I saw the same terrible conflict in her eyes as before, but this time it was different. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was grim determination. The fear had a face now. It had a name, Arthur. She gave a slow, final nod. Fine, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Let's see how it ends. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely thread the film into the projector. The familiar whir and click started up, but tonight it sounded like a death rattle. We didn't bother turning off the lights. We just sat on the couch, side by side, staring at the blank, white square projected onto our wall. The film began. It was different from the others. The quality was terrible. It was dark, shaky, and chaotic, like it was filmed in a panic. The camera was pointed at a house illuminated by porch lights and the faint glow of dawn. Our house. The camera zoomed in, the motion jerky. We could see the family from the birthday party and the Christmases, frantically loading boxes and suitcases into a station wagon. The kids were crying. The mom was looking over her shoulder every few seconds, her face pale with terror. The dad slammed the trunk shut and hustled everyone into the car. It was a scene of pure, unadulterated panic. They were fleeing. "They're shooting this from across the street," Chloe whispered, her hand gripping my arm so tight it hurt. She was right. The angle was unmistakable. It was being filmed from a parked car, the same spot where Arthur's house now stood. We weren't watching the family's home movie. We were watching them through the eyes of the person who had driven them away. The station wagon's taillights flared as it peeled out of the driveway, tires squealing. The camera held on our empty house for a long, quiet moment. Then, the person holding the camera lowered it. The frame tilted down, showing the inside of the car they were filming from. The dashboard of a 1970s sedan. Then, the camera panned slowly, shakily, to the right. It panned over the empty passenger seat. It kept going, moving toward the passenger side window. And for one crystal clear, heart-stopping second, the camera caught the reflection in the car's side view mirror. It was a face, a man's face, 40 years younger, with sharp features and dark, intense eyes behind a pair of thick-rimmed glasses. His hair was dark, his expression was placid, emotionless, triumphant, a face we now knew. It was Arthur. The film flapped. That's the sound I remember. After the image of Arthur's young, dead-eyed face vanished from the mirror, the projector kept running. The take-up reel spun uselessly and the tail end of the film strip whipped around and around, making a frantic, repetitive flapping sound against the machine's metal body. Flap, 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 flap. It was the only sound in the universe. My brain couldn't form a word. It couldn't even form a coherent thought. There was just this roaring white noise in my head and the sound of that flapping film. Chloe made a noise, a strangled little gasp, like someone who'd been holding their breath underwater for too long and had finally broken the surface, only to find the air was poison. "No," she whispered. The word was a puff of air. "Liam, no." The pieces weren't just connecting in my head. They were ramming into each other with the force of a car crash. The box wasn't a time capsule left by a family. It was a trophy case. A hunter's stash, left behind in the attic. Those weren't home movies. They were surveillance footage, birthday party, Christmas, summer vacation, and then, goodbye. A complete collection. He'd watched them, he'd recorded them, and then he'd watched them leave in terror, filming that too, the final prize of his collection. A quiet street where we all look out for each other. The words echoed in my skull, no longer a friendly greeting but a possessive, chilling threat. He wasn't the neighbor, he was the house's warden, and we were the new inmates. My breath hitched. The box. He'd left the box here. Why? Did he forget it? Did he think he'd never need it again? Or did he leave it for the next family? For us. A little welcome package, a primer on the rules of his game. Here's what happened to the last people who lived in my house. "He's been doing this for 40 years, I said, my voice sounding distant and thin. I finally turned to look at Chloe. Her face was bleached of all color, her eyes wide with a horror so profound it looked like physical pain. She was staring at the blank white square on the wall where the moving pictures had been. "He documented the whole thing," she breathed. "From start to finish, like a project." The flapping of the film strip was starting to sound like mocking laughter. I lurched forward, my movements stiff and jerky, and fumbled for the power switch on the projector. The blessed silence that followed was even worse. It was heavy, suffocating, filled with the knowledge of the man across the street. Not just a man, a monster wearing an old man's skin, a patient predator who had been watching this house, his territory, for longer than we had been alive. We weren't just in a house he was watching. We were in his house. We had invaded his stage, stumbled into his long-running production. He brought us brownies. The thought was so absurd, so grotesquely domestic, that a hysterical laugh almost bubbled up in my throat. He'd stood on our porch, smiled at us, shaken my hand, and all the while he was probably thinking about what label he'd put on our film reel. And then, as if a switch was thrown by some malevolent god, the world ended. Click. Every light in the house went out. The lamp in the corner, the digital clock on the cable box, the faint glow from the kitchen, all of it, gone. The projector, which I just turned off, was now doubly dead. We were plunged into an absolute, disorienting darkness. Not the gentle darkness of a sleeping house, but a thick, black, predatory void. The kind of darkness that feels like a physical presence. For a second, there was nothing. No sound, no light, just the frantic hammering of my own heart and the sound of Chloe's sharp, terrified intake of breath beside me. "The breaker," I whispered, trying to inject a sense of control into my voice that I did not feel. It must have tripped the breaker. But I knew it wasn't the breaker. It was him. This was part of it. The performance. And then we heard it. It came from the back of the house. From the kitchen. A small, insignificant sound at first. A faint scrape. The sound of metal on wood. My blood turned to ice water. It was a precise, deliberate sound. Not a raccoon. Not the house settling. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Liam. Chloe's voice was a thread of sound in the blackness, so thin I could barely hear it. Her hand found my arm, her nails digging into my bicep like claws. "The back door," I breathed. The door with the old-fashioned bolt lock we kept meaning to replace. Crick. A louder sound this time. The sound of wood splintering under pressure. He was prying it open. He had cut the power and was now calmly, methodically breaking into our home. The time for observation was over. The filmmaker was coming onto the set. Panic, cold and sharp, finally broke through the paralysis. It wasn't a choice, it was a pure, animal instinct. "The bedroom," I hissed, yanking Chloe by the arm. "Now." We stumbled through the darkness. It's amazing how unfamiliar your own home can become when you can't see. I crashed a hip into the edge of the coffee table, a flare of pain that was instantly swallowed by adrenaline. Chloe cried out as she tripped over a rug. We were like two blind mice in a maze, and the cat was already inside. We scrambled down the short hallway, our bare feet slapping against the hardwood floor. The sounds from the kitchen were getting louder. A low groan as the door jamb began to give way. We fumbled our way into the master bedroom, and I slammed the heavy wooden door shut behind us. The sound echoed in the small space. The lock, Chloe, the lock. Her hands were shaking too badly. I could hear her sobbing, fumbling with the small brass knob on the doorknob. "I can't, it's stuck." I pushed her aside, my own fingers slick with sweat. I found the little turn lock, my thumb slipping twice before I finally managed to twist it. The snick of the bolt shooting into place was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard, but it felt as useful as a paper shield. Crack thump. From the back of the house, the sound of the kitchen door finally giving way. And then, silence. A ringing, terrible silence. He was in. He was inside our house. We stood with our backs pressed against the bedroom door, as if our combined weight could somehow reinforce it. I held Chloe, her body trembling uncontrollably against mine. I strained my ears, listening. Every nerve in my body was on fire, trying to decipher the sounds in the darkness. Then, a footstep. It was on the hardwood of the living room. It was slow, unhurried, the creak of a single floorboard under a heavy, deliberate weight. He wasn't running. He wasn't rushing. This wasn't a robbery. It was a visit. Creak. Another step. Closer. He was in the hallway now. The short hallway that led directly to where we were hiding. My mind flashed back to the way he walked across the street. That same slow, ambling, purposeful pace. He was moving through our house like he owned it. And in a way, he did. He knew its history. He knew its secrets. He knew the family that came before us, and God only knew how many families came before them. Creak. He was halfway down the hall. I could almost feel the vibration through the floor. I scanned the darkness of our room, my eyes searching for a weapon, for anything. A lamp, a book. Pathetic. There was the heavy oak dresser against the far wall. If we could just get to it, maybe we could push it in front of the door. But there was no time. He was too close. Chloe buried her face in my chest, her breaths coming in ragged, muffled sobs. "Make him go away," she wept. "Please, God, make him go away." I held her tighter, my own throat closing up with terror. All the rational parts of my brain had shut down. All that was left was the lizard part, the part that knew we were trapped, that a predator was just outside our den. Creak. The sound was right outside the door now. So close I flinched. And then, a final, soft footstep onto the small rug right in front of our door. And then, nothing. The silence was absolute, a crushing, unbearable weight. He was there. He was standing on the other side of that thin piece of wood, listening. Could he hear our hearts? Could he hear our terrified, shallow breathing? My entire body was coiled like a spring, waiting for the splintering crash of the door breaking inward, waiting for the attack. 1 second, 2, 10, a lifetime. The silence stretched on, twisting my nerves into knots. What was he doing? What was he waiting for? And then I heard it. A new sound. A sound that was so impossible, so out of place, that it broke my mind all over again. A small, metallic click, followed by a faint, familiar whirring sound. A sound I had just silenced minutes ago. A sound that had been the soundtrack to our discovery, to our dawning horror. Whir. The sound of the Super-8 projector starting up. My eyes shot down to the bottom of the door. A line of flickering, dancing lights suddenly appeared in the crack between the door and the floor. It spilled into our dark room, a sickly yellow-white beam, casting strange, jerking shadows on our feet. On the wall of the hallway, on the other side of our door, images were playing out. Muted, blurry shapes and colors, projected onto the blank canvas of the wall. I could just make out the shape of a Christmas tree, the flicker of a child's face, laughing. He wasn't trying to break down the door. He wasn't shouting or threatening. He was standing in our hallway, in the dark, showing us his movies. He had come for his collection. And maybe, just maybe, he was here to start a new reel. The sound broke my brain. I mean, what's the protocol for that? What part of human evolution prepares you for a monster standing outside your bedroom door, playing home movies on the hallway wall? He wasn't trying to kick the door down. He wasn't screaming. He was just showing us. The yellow light danced under the door, a flickering, taunting pulse. It was a show. That's what it was. He wasn't just a stalker, he was a director, a producer, and this was the premiere. Chloe was making a sound next to me, a low, continuous whimper. It was the sound of a system completely overloaded, of a mind that had simply shut down. Her eyes were fixed on the line of light under the door, wide and unseeing. She was gone, but I was here, and a part of my brain, a cold, hard little nugget of survival that I didn't know existed, was screaming. Not in fear, but in anger. A pure, white-hot fury. He was in our house. He was terrorizing my wife. And he was doing it like he was watching television. My eyes darted around the dark room, my mind racing faster than it ever had. Lamp, book, useless. My gaze landed on the heavy oak dresser against the far wall. It was a beast, one of those solid, 70s-era pieces of furniture we'd complained about moving in. It probably weighed 300 pounds. It was perfect. Chloe, I whispered, my voice rough. She didn't respond. I grabbed her shoulders and gave her a little shake. Chloe, her head lolled toward me, her eyes still vacant. Listen to me. The dresser. We have to move the dresser in front of the door. Now. For a second, nothing. Then, a flicker of understanding. A tiny spark in the terrified darkness of her eyes. She nodded, a jerky, puppet-like movement. Outside, the whirring of the projector was a constant, maddening hum. It was the soundtrack to our own, real-life horror movie. On 3, I breathed. Ready? 1, 2, 3, push. We threw our weight against the solid wood. Nothing. It didn't budge. It was like trying to push a car in neutral. Again, I grunted. We pushed again, our feet slipping on the hardwood floor, our breath coming in ragged gasps. The dresser gave a low groan and scraped an inch across the floor. The sound was deafening in the small room. Louder than the projector. Louder than my own hammering heart. From the hallway, the whirring of the projector stopped. The dancing light under the door vanished. Silence. A thick, heavy silence that was 1,000 times worse than the noise. We froze, our hands still braced against the dresser. Had he heard us? Of course he'd heard us. And then, a soft thump against the bedroom door. He was leaning on it, listening. My blood ran cold. The moment was stretched thin, about to snap. And then, Chloe moved. I hadn't even realized she'd let go of the dresser, but she already had her phone out. I'd forgotten we even had phones. Her thumb was a blur on the screen, her face illuminated by the pale blue light in a ghostly glow. There was no fumbling, no hesitation, just pure, focused action. She hit the call button, pressed the phone to her ear, her other hand covering her mouth to muffle her breathing. Boom! A heavy slam against the door. Not a kick. It sounded like he'd thrown his shoulder against it. The old wood shuddered in its frame. The brass doorknob rattled violently. Come on, I hissed, putting my back into the dresser this time, using my legs. Push. Chloe dropped her phone onto the bed, the 911 operator's tinny voice still asking questions, and threw her weight next to mine. Grunting, sobbing, we shoved. Scrrrrrrraape. The dresser lurched forward, its legs screaming in protest against the wood floor. Another foot. Boom. Another slam on the door, stronger this time. A crack appeared in the wood panel near the lock. He was going to break it down. He was done with his movie night. The window, Chloe gasped, pointing. Liam, the window. It was our only other way out. A sheer drop of about 10 feet to the backyard. I didn't care if I broke both my legs. We scrambled over the bed. I tore at the cheap blinds, pulling them down in a clatter of plastic and cord. I fumbled with the latch on the old window. It was painted shut. Of course it was. Crack. The sound of the door frame splintering from the hallway. We were out of time. I didn't think. I just acted. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find on the nightstand, a thick glass lamp base, and without a moment's hesitation, I swung it as hard as I could into the window pane. The explosion of shattering glass was the most beautiful sound in the world. It echoed the shattering of our lives in this house. Cold night air rushed in, smelling of damp earth and cut grass. Go, I yelled, shoving Chloe toward the opening. Don't look back, just go. I cleared the remaining shards of glass from the frame with the lamp base, ignoring the sting as a piece sliced across my forearm. Chloe clambered through, her nightgown snagging on a jagged edge. I heard her land with a soft thud on the grass below. Then it was my turn. I threw one leg over the sill just as the bedroom door crashed open behind me. I didn't see him. I didn't want to. I just felt his presence filling the room, a void of cold, patient malevolence. I threw myself out into the blackness, tucking and rolling as I hit the ground. Pain shot up my ankle, but adrenaline screamed louder. I was on my feet in a second, grabbing Chloe's hand. We ran blindly, wildly, across our own backyard, a place where we planned to have barbecues. We crashed through the hedges that separated our property from the neighbors, the branches scratching at our faces and arms. We didn't stop until we were pounding on the back door of the Hendersons' house, screaming for help. And then, another sound cut through the night, faintly at first, then growing louder and louder. A wail that rose and fell, splitting the perfect suburban silence. The sound of sirens, the most welcome sound I have ever heard. The lights in the Hendersons' house flickered on. The back door opened, and as a bewildered Mr. Henderson stood there in his bathrobe, we collapsed into his kitchen, gasping for air, safe. From his kitchen window, we watched the flashing red and blue lights paint our house in strobing, frantic colors. We saw two officers go in the front door. A few minutes later, they came out, and between them was Arthur. He wasn't struggling. He wasn't resisting. He walked with that same slow, deliberate pace, his hands cuffed behind his back. As they guided him to the squad car, he turned his head. He looked past the police cars, past the gathering neighbors in their pajamas, and his eyes found ours through the window. He didn't look angry. He didn't look crazy. He looked disappointed, like a filmmaker whose screening had been rudely interrupted before the final scene. Weeks passed. We never went back to the house, not even to get our things. We couldn't. We stayed with Chloe's parents, sleeping in a guest room that felt like a fortress. The police had a moving company pack up everything for us. The house went on the market as a police seizure. We just wanted to forget. But you can't forget something like that. It gets into your bones. It rewrites your sense of safety. One afternoon, a Detective Miller came to see us. He was a tired-looking man in his 50s, with a kind face that had clearly seen too much. He sat on the floral sofa in Chloe's parents' living room and updated us. Arthur Williams, he said, reading from a small notebook, lived in that house across the street for 52 years. Neighbors said he was quiet, kept to himself. The perfect old man. He shook his head. We searched his house, of course. For the most part, it was sparse. Clean. Nothing out of the ordinary. Until we got to the attic. Miller paused and looked at us over the rim of his glasses. It was his life's work up there. A library, but instead of books, it was film reels. Hundreds of Super-8 reels, shelves and shelves of them. And stacks of VHS tapes from the 80s and 90s. All of it meticulously organized. My stomach clenched. The other families, I said. It wasn't a question. Miller nodded slowly. Every family that ever lived on that block. He didn't label the boxes with their names, though. He labeled them by address. 112 Grove Street, 116 Grove Street, 120 Grove Street. A whole history of the neighborhood, all from his perspective. All surveillance. I felt Chloe's hand find mine, her grip ice cold. We were just 114 Grove Street to him. The latest acquisition. The detective sighed, a weary, heavy sound. He seemed reluctant to continue. The thing is, he said, his voice dropping a little, he hadn't been charged with anything major in decades. We think what he did was watch. He'd find a way to get his camera into their houses, left in an attic, for example, and then he would just watch the lives of the people who lived across from him unfold. When they found his collection and got scared, he'd film their panic as they left. That was his finale. Then he'd wait for the next family to move in. A cold dread, worse than the fear I felt that night, began to creep up my spine. It was a methodical, lifelong sickness. We weren't his first. We weren't even his 10th. We finished cataloging the evidence from his attic this morning, Miller said, looking down at his notebook again. In the section he had for your address, 114 Grove, we found the old reels. The ones of the family from the 70s. The ones you found. He paused, and I remember he took his glasses off and cleaned them on his tie. It's funny the things you notice. He was stalling. He didn't want to say the last part. Behind those old reels, he said, finally meeting my eyes. Tucked away in the back. We found another box. My throat was too dry to speak. It was a new box, the detective said, his voice barely a whisper now. A modern one. He took a deep breath. Inside was a digital video camera. A nice one, and a single, blank memory card. He closed his notebook, the sound of the cover shutting seeming to echo in the silent room. There was a little white sticker on the memory card, he said. With your names on it.